Yeah, so my name is Evan Waters. I work at ThoughtWorks actually, and I wanted to tell you about a story of an inspiring man I met in Malawi, where I worked with Partners in Health. Some of you may have heard of him. So a few years ago, I was working at Partners in Health in Malawi. It's a country in Central Africa. It's about the size of Pennsylvania. It has about 15 million people. It's a pretty rural place, and actually I hadn't heard of it other than the fact that Madonna had adopted a child from there until I got the job and moved down there back in 2007. It is a place where a lot of kids go to school for primary school because it's free. So if you go to the little towns, you see these big schools. They're pretty, low budget. They have desks, things like that, but that's about it. But then secondary school is actually not free. And you see a large drop-off in attendance at that age. And then also it's a country where most of the people are getting by as subsistence farmers. So about 80% of the population depends on rain-fed agriculture to get by. So they're actually very vulnerable, obviously, to different types of shocks. And basically each year is a bit of a struggle as a result. So William Kamkwambe is a typical Malawian boy. He lived with his parents in Kasungu, which is in the central part of the country. He went to school, he helped out on the farm, and he would spend his spare time in the market actually fixing radios and doing electronics and things like that, which was something that he was passionate about. In 2002, just when William started secondary school, there was a really bad drought. And as a result, there wasn't much corn to grow. And so his parents didn't have a lot of money, and they had to start buying food. Because they had to start buying food, they couldn't afford to send William to school. So as a result, he had to drop out. And he actually had to help support his family. And William, he was a typical kid, so that was actually a pretty typical story for a lot of people in Malawi of his age. But he was also a pretty unique kid with a really strong intellect and a really powerful curiosity. And he was also pretty lucky, as it turns out. Because right near William, there was a small library with lots of different books. William liked electronics, and so he would actually go and he would look at these physics textbooks, and he would study the circuits, and he would try to figure out what was going on. He didn't even speak that good English, as it turned out, but he would look at and he would kind of make sense of the diagrams and the arrows and learn about electromagnetism. And in one book, he saw a picture of a windmill, and he thought, you know what? I think I could build that. That makes sense. Like I see wind. I think I can make that out of some locally available materials and actually maybe bring electricity to my home. So he started to think about a design, and he started to look around at his area and some of the materials that he had, and he actually built it. His neighbors thought he was crazy, but he went out there and he chopped down trees, he made poles, he took a bicycle, he actually lived near a tobacco plantation. He took old PVC pipes and he cut them and he melted them to make the blades, and he stood the thing up, and it worked. It powered his house. A couple of the key things that he did, again, a bicycle for rotary motion. He knew that if you had a dynamo and you put it on the wheel of the bike, that when the bike wheel turned, it would light up the light. And so he figured out that he could just connect that to lights in his house. So voila, electricity. But it only worked when the wind blew. So he figured out a way to get a rectifier diode to power a car battery and actually store the energy, which is pretty cool. And he kept on inventing. I mean, he put pulleys in. He actually made a magnetic circuit breaker, which would shut off if there was a surge so that he wouldn't burn out his lights anymore. And it was a pretty amazing story if you just stopped right there. He completed it in 2002, so the same year as that famine struck. It cost about $15 in the US. And actually, it already paid for itself. I mean, basically, the amount of energy it provided powered lights, which saved his family almost $500 a year just in the paraffin that they didn't have to buy. So again, a pretty amazing story. If we stopped there, it would be cool. But a few years passed, and then people came to look at the library, and they saw the windmill, and they brought a reporter back. And the reporter wrote a story in the national newspaper, which talked about William's story. And then that story actually got picked up. So a friend of mine in Malawi named Soyapi, who was a technologist himself, blogged about it. His friend Mike blogged about it. A guy named Eric in Kenya blogged about it. And the next thing that you knew, William was actually at TED in Arusha on stage with people from all over the world telling his story. And he made some friends there, and his friends actually helped him go back to Malawi, start school again. And that's where our stories intersected. So I actually knew Soyapi, and I knew a couple of the guys he worked with. We were working together on electronic medical health records in Malawi at the time. And so we're actually, right when I arrived in Malawi, I had a chance to go up and visit William with some of these guys at his place in Kasungu. And it was pretty cool. He had built even taller windmills with more blades. He was installing solar panels at some of the neighboring houses. And you could tell there was this little kind of energy buzzing around the place. And it was just an amazing experience to be there and see, what this kid had made. And so the story took off from there. So the Wall Street Journal actually met him in the Lilongwe. His article was published. He ends up going to school in South Africa. He ends up getting connected to an author. And then all of a sudden he's on stage at The Daily Show, giving one of the best interviews I've ever seen with Jon Stewart, making him laugh. He goes on to Dartmouth. When he was seen on The Daily Show, they contacted him. He checked it out, liked it, cool. And he actually just graduated from Dartmouth, and now he's going to become a fellow with IDEO.org, looking into renewable energy for places like Malawi, where he comes from. So it's a really inspiring story. And one of his words, he says, is basically, wanted to tell my story so that others like me would be inspired to follow their dreams. Basically, I think there's tons of potential, and it only takes a bit of to give somebody a chance and unlock it, which is a pretty cool story. So thank you very much.